Hi everyone, welcome back home to my YouTube channel. You need love here, and today what we are going to be talking about how spirituality, me personally, this is a personal belief, don't come at me, spirituality and sexuality intersect. I believe they both go hand in hand. And I'm going to be walking you through that journey of how it goes hand in hand, what that looks like, and what it can almost, what that journey can just come with overall when you do hit that point, because it's a point where in your spiritual journey where sexuality becomes like this thing that has to be brought to the surface and discussed and talked about, but also explored, where you have to develop this relationship with it. And I don't think it's something that the way that sexuality and spirituality intersects isn't a way that I think society talks about sexuality. Well, it definitely isn't. It's not something we're taught. It's more of an experience. I feel like there's something you can't go to school and learn about. I almost feel like this is what they don't want to tell people about sexuality, which is why it's experiential. You have to just embark on it on your own, or you'll just find yourself sticking to rigid structures and beliefs and roles that have been placed on you, even though internally you have this calling to be curious and explore that aspect of yourself. So yeah, I feel like spirituality to me now holds a significant role in my sexuality and also my identity. And I feel like within my queerness and transness, spirituality is a core factor, a significant factor within my queerness and transness. And not only is it just my spirituality, but my queerness and transness plays a huge role in my spiritual purpose, how I feel. This is how I feel. And once again, I don't know if I mentioned this in my initial video about it, or I'm probably my last video where I said don't stay there for too long, you have so much to explore. I feel like I talked a bit about how moving out of my hometown, I was allowed to now be curious about something as a child I couldn't even question without having like an adverse reaction. Like I would say certain things. For instance, I mentioned how my mom has always been in like these negative relationships with men. And I will always wonder, like, why are you just staying in them? Why are you allowing people to treat you like such? And I remember I made a comment, and she took it on as like a surface level. She looked at it very surface level and didn't really see the intention and the purpose of the comment that I made. And I essentially, what I said was, if I had a daughter, I would just prefer her to be a lesbian. And initially what I was getting a dig at was that, you know, my mom's in these nasty, negative, non-beneficial relationship with these men who are treating her clearly like she's not worth anything, is how I'm viewing it as a child. That if this is how men are, if this is what men do in relationship with women, I would prefer my daughter to be gay. But essentially I was telling my mom that she should probably, on like the beneath the surface level, beyond it, I was telling her that she should probably stop dealing with the men that she's dealing with. But she took it, just hearing simply the word lesbian, that I would just hope my daughter would just be a lesbian. And was like, what are you talking about? And just had this whole adverse reaction because she didn't see beyond the comment itself to see that I was actually picking at something much deeper, and it really had nothing to do with my my daughter that I don't have, and me wanting her to be a lesbian. But her adverse reaction, like, no, always had solidified within me that topics like this regarding sex, or even if it was sexuality, was taboo and shouldn't be talked about, and you shouldn't be curious about it, and you shouldn't explore it. So eventually this led to me being like very recluse to sex, but also somewhat intentional. Because I saw those experiences my mom went through, I wanted to be extremely intentional about approaching sex and how I engage in it, but it also really made me recluse and like very avoidant to something I clearly wanted to experience and something that I had a desire for. And I was intentional. I made sure that I like had sex right when I went to college. And even that experience, and this is where I say sex, because sexuality is just not just for me personally, it's the components of sex and intimacy and you know, what one person is attracted to as well. But this all had to be explored. Like, even my first time losing my virginity wasn't something, it wasn't ideal the way that I lost it. It wasn't actually until like recently this year that I realized that essentially me losing my virginity because I felt pressure, and essentially at my core I didn't want to do it, but I was in a relationship with someone who did. Wasn't as I was talking to a friend, she was like, yeah, that would be considered like rape, you know. Somewhere in there it's classified as that because you didn't want to do it, and there was other contributing factors, and I completely looked over it. I just was like, oh, this was an unsatisfying like sexual experience. With the second time I had, it was very intentional. I loved it, but I was very intentional in that aspect where I was like, I'm gonna wait till this age to have it. That didn't solidify that I would have a good experience. It was just like, this is, I felt like the age that I wanted to just have it at. When I was around a lot of my friends who were having it at a lot of like a lot younger than I was. They were having it like their freshman, sophomore year of high school, some even sooner. So I felt like, for me personally, I wanted to do it when I went to college. I also didn't want to have anything going on with anyone in my hometown. I didn't like anything of my hometown, which is why I say, when you do move and you take yourself out of an environment that has unexpected obligations or expectations of you, and you take yourself out of an environment that has formed and structured you to think and be and exist and look a certain type of way, and essentially what that is straggling you further from knowing who you are deep down in your core. And it's basically like, it's a copy and paste. I'm copying and pasting you. I'm copying and pasting you in what society tells you how you should look and how you should think and how you should be and what you should do. And not only is it a copy and paste from those societal conditionings, but it's also culture, whatever your culture is, and also environmental, whatever's in your immediate environment, including, you know, whose roof, you know, who you're living with, and also like the town itself. So it wasn't until I moved where now all these desires were now being brought up, but now I can approach it and I can explore it from a different perspective because I don't have an opposing reaction to now these, not even new, but these resurfacing feelings. And it wouldn't have happened if I wasn't tuning in with my spirituality. So bringing it back, I feel like everyone has their own different meaning of what they think spirituality is. We all can have our own meaning. For me personally, spirituality is looking at the core of my being. It's an internal journey that then gets reflected externally through the internal work that I'm doing. I consider myself to be an internal worker. I'm constantly thinking, I'm constantly reflecting, I'm constantly observing, analyzing my behavior, also while living. And I'm extremely analytical of like how I'm showing up and moving through life. And most importantly, what spirituality is to me is also authenticity. So how I'm showing up through life and how authentic that is to who I am internally at my core. So spirituality to me is just getting, looking within one's self to connect, and look beyond the surface to things that can be tied or bound to the many aspects that makes us who we are, from our sexuality and identity, and from why we make the choices that we make and the decisions, and how does that all correlate at the core of who I am. But in, like I said, in simple words and simplistic terms, essentially spirituality is connecting with oneself. That's how I view it. It's how deep one connects with themselves. You'll realize you're multidimensional. You'll realize there's multiple aspects to who we are, and we shouldn't be, not that we can't focus on one thing or whatever the case may be, but there's so many aspects of ourselves that needs to be acknowledged. Where a lot of us, there's parts and aspects of ourselves where we've learned to put into closets and we put into cage, and we don't open those doors, because if we open those doors, what comes out, not everyone's willing to face. And not everyone's willing to look face to face with their shadow. So, like how I was saying, talking of the shadow, my spirituality brought me a point to look at my sexual trauma. So I was very like averse and like opposed, not like don't have sex, but just like I wasn't engaging in something that I was obviously curious about. How did it work and what does this look like and how does one approach it? And also like I have these desires, I'm having these feelings, I'm growing, I'm feeling things, you know what I'm saying? So my trauma made me a bit averse to it due to being like hypersexuality, being hypersexual at some point, and then there's a pipeline from just being hypersexual to completely being like sexually recluse. They go hand in hand, but at the core of those two things are trauma. Like trauma's right here, and then it's being sexually recluse, and then hypersexual. And at the core is some sort of trauma. Tapping deeper into myself, I had to look, because if I'm connecting with my spirituality and that's connecting with myself, that also means I have to connect with my inner child and my inner teen and my higher self and my lower self and these nasty feelings and these happy feelings, you know what I'm saying? So a part of that and connecting with my inner child, I had to shift and move and feel and dig up this sexual trauma that I experienced as a young child. And it wasn't even just like whether I was touched or whether I was abused in some sort of way, because I'm not disclosing that here. But it was also looking at those parts, but also how if I talked about anything regarding sexuality, if I talked about anything regarding sex, how adverse or like opposing my mother was towards it, where it was like, you don't say that, you don't talk like that, no, people don't do this. So I was just like, okay, maybe what that did when it came to exploring my sexuality was like, okay, I probably shouldn't. If I'm even having thoughts of doing such, something's wrong. And then I started connecting back to myself, and I'm like, no, these are valid feelings that you have. Not everyone's meant to be the same. Not everyone's meant to maneuver, and not everyone's meant to be the same. Not everyone's meant to like the same thing or be attracted to the same thing. This is why we're unique. If I was meant to like I feel like if I was meant to like everything my mom liked, I would have reincarnated here as her. I'm not. I'm in this unique looking body with my own unique thoughts, my own unique beliefs. And I would be doing myself a disservice if I chose to live a life based on someone else's belief systems and what they thought was morally good or morally bad and morally correct and morally incorrect, and literally just going based on how I live my life from someone else's guidelines. I would do myself a disservice. And that would have kept me in keeping, once again, in my last video, being in front of people, choosing people, doing certain things in certain environments past their expiration date. Because there's clearly an inner calling happening from within, where I'm having these feelings, I'm having these emotions, these desires, these certain passions towards certain things. And there's another part of me that's been built and guarded and protected and sheltered, not willingly. It does come a point, I feel like, when you hit a certain age where it's like now you're willingly choosing these things. It's not even that someone placed them on you. Yes, someone has placed them on you. Someone did tell you to do X, Y, and Z, but now you're willingly choosing them. And now it's up to you, because you have the autonomy. That's what I said, where I hit a point where I was just giving my power away so willingly to people. Just giving it away. And I failed to realize, because the rose-colored glasses I had on, the power never left. I was just like, here, have it. But when it was time to find this power, it wasn't like I had to go against the grain with the people I was giving it to. It was like, no, actually acknowledging that I have the power, I have the autonomy to do whatever it is that I wanted to do. And when I was able to do that, it was like a part of me becoming like, I was reclaiming a part of myself that I let go, that I was told didn't matter, that I was told, and that I was also telling, you didn't matter, and we're not gonna focus on you right now because you're not significant, until it came in diving deeper into myself and connecting with myself and the multiple aspects of what makes me me, and where it was like, oh, you are important. So it was like, these parts of myself are important, and they're significant for me to grow. They're significant for me to expand beyond the barriers that I have chosen to place onto me and have allowed others to place onto me. And this is where I was saying earlier that I feel like sexuality is expressed throughout medias, in society, from person to person, from how people think, in a way that is not true to its nature. And I say this because what I feel like sexuality does is, whether it's reclaiming these aspects of our identity or engaging in the intimate act itself, it's a way to heal. And for me, that's what it was. It was a way to heal once I explored my sexuality. It brought up desire, and I was like, okay, what is desire? What does that mean to me? What does my desires look like? Okay, pleasure. What does pleasure mean to me? And as someone who had a hard time telling people no, and you know, if you have a hard time telling people no, outside of just people pleasing for things where you can't tell someone you won't pick up their task, you won't pick up their baggage, whatever the case may be, that trickles down to when it comes to those intimate acts where someone could be doing something to you that you don't like, or it just doesn't feel good. And it's because you have a fear of saying no, that is not like how I'm connecting it to sexuality. It don't even have to be connected to sexuality, but I guarantee if you have a hard time of just telling people no in the bedroom, you have a hard time of expressing your desires and what pleasure is to you. And when something doesn't feel good, or you're not really down for something, you struggle with being able to just communicate it without feeling like it's going to cause an issue or be a problem. And that's what it was for me. So now that I'm reclaiming these parts of my identity, but also approaching this intimate act with intentionality, within this part of my journey of getting to know myself, sexuality became this thing of transformation and transmutation. I was taking this shame and this guilt that came from my sexual trauma, that came from my mother's voices and her own set of beliefs that she probably gained from what was told to her by her parents and her immediate environment that she was around growing up. And it went from guilt and shame and this low and heavy negative emotion to curiosity. Here's the inner child: curiosity, exploration, joy, and satisfaction. And I was centering those things around exploring it: satisfaction and joy and pleasure and like this emotional gratification, if that's a word, like just having like this such an immense amount of emotions, but in a good type of way, wanting it to feel. I was centering these things around exploring it, the intimate act, exploring my sexuality, to know like, what is Uni like? What is Uni attracted to? What does Uni love? What are my boundaries in the bedroom? What are my pleasures in and outside of the bedroom? And that's the thing, it's not even just the intimate act itself. It's like, what are my pleasures in and outside of the bedroom? What are my desires in and outside of the bedroom? What is my desires and pleasures when it comes to connecting with people, whether it's romantically, sexually, or platonically? What is my connection to pleasure and desire outside of just dealing with people, but how I'm moving through life? And I think there's a certain type of sensuality outside of the look and feelings of things that spirituality also connects us with. The way that we want to move through life. How seamlessly do we want to move? How smoothly do we want to move? Some people are meant to move through life very up, down. And some people are very like, and some people are very like, you know what I'm saying? And so sensuality is outside of just a feeling, physical feeling of things, but just like this internal feeling. And it's connecting with those things that brings us joy, that's sensual, and pleasure, that's sensual, and softness, that's sensual, but also how we choose to move through life as well, how we want to move. But yeah, exploring, once I got to this part of my spirituality, sexuality was like this very significant factor that I had to address and approach and develop my own relationship with. And a lot of these aspects and parts of ourselves and parts of our identity is really just like developing our own relationship with them, informing who we are at our core. Essentially, once again, I can say that's what spirituality is. That's a component of spirituality outside of like decoding and looking beyond certain things and symbolism and angel numbers and all that. This is an aspect of it. And it holds a significant meaning. I would not be able to meet the person that I am today if I didn't go through those experiences and exploring my sexuality and thinking and reflecting and exploring sex from a more intentional space, from a more healed space, and from a space where I was centering my desires. That was very powerful. That was very I felt so strong, and I still feeling strong because I'm still exploring these parts of myself where I was able to, no, I like this in the bedroom, or I like this, and just simply, whether it's in or out of the bedroom, I like this. This what brings me pleasure. This what brings me joy. And this needs to censor those things, or I cannot engage with it anymore. I will not subject myself to anything that doesn't censor joy and pleasure and that isn't expansive. I don't want to engage in anything that makes me feel restricted, constricted, and tight. Because what I was censoring was expansiveness and fluidity. And funny enough, when I was experiencing, I met a lot of people who were on that same path of like just how they identify, whether it was like fluid or something. So I think it was also like, once again, when you are an internal worker or you choose to work internally, your reality will start, your external reality starts reflecting when you work on your internal reality. And I started to meet people. I was like, oh my God, this is like the universe affirming me. It was like my physical reality, like the universe was affirming me along my journey and acknowledging that I am moving in alignment and I can trust what I was doing at the time that I was doing it. Essentially, that journey led me to really solidify and ground myself within my queerness, but also realize how queerness intersected so much with my spirituality, because it wasn't even just how I approach sex and how I think about it, and how I approach sexuality and how I think about it. It was now coming to how my queerness was rooted in my way of choosing of how I want to live life, how I think through life, the beliefs I hold through life, and how overall I'm just maneuvering with these aspects of myself. And I said this on my TikTok, and people were mad because I was like, not everyone's queer. It doesn't mean of how I dress and the eyebrows and the piercings, the tattoos. And queerness isn't a physical representation of anything, because what I think a lot of people have done is forgot that words have meaning, and some of these words also have a historical path, a historical journey behind them, these words. And if you look deeply into queerness, you'll find that a lot of queerness and transness was founded in Black and Indigenous cultures pre-colonialism. And that's where exploring my sexuality kind of led me down this path of starting to research, because I had this random thought that came out of nowhere. I was like, I want to know also how sexuality and identity and gender was viewed pre-colonialism. And I don't know why that came about, but I just hit that part of my journey. And I came across the term two-spirit and a bunch of the other things that were in like African cultures and African societies and Native American and Indigenous societies. But also I was finding out things that we have always existed all throughout, from Asia to Europe to Africa to South America to North America, all of these parts of the world. People who would be classified as queer or trans now have always existed, because what it was leaving me with was like, why is there in society such a like mass hatred towards a specific group of people? And then I started diving into how sex and sexuality, sexuality and gender specifically was perceived pre-colonialism, because colonialism has impacted a lot of how we think, and specifically in the Western culture and Western society, it plays a part in like just eradicating I feel like anything that is viewed as powerful, but also viewed as nonsensical or non-logical. And Western, I feel like society tries to make sense of things to the point where it strips it of its meaning, giving it a whole new meaning, but putting a whole negative spin to it. And a lot of these queer and just like out of the binary sexualities and genders that existed, because they had different terms for them. A lot of these, and these specifically Black and Indigenous cultures, these people who would be classified as such or identified as such held a very spiritual role in their society. And not only spiritual role in society, they were uplifted, they were looked at and as just honorable people. They were acknowledged as such, they were appreciated. And this is not me saying that there wasn't some part in the world where it still wasn't viewed or looked at negatively. I believe in the law of polarity. If there's love, there's hate. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't have to be to the extent that we probably have it now, but it probably exists in some form with someone who just couldn't make sense of it, or someone who simply couldn't, acknowledge their own feelings. I think some people who have an issue with these groups of people also fear how authentic we are. And And we're like a reminder of how inauthentic they choose to be. So a lot of these people in these indigenous and Black cultures pre-colonialism who were queer, who and today would be considered queer and trans, had different terms, one, but they were honored, they were acknowledged, and they held very spiritual roles as like mediators, peacemakers, teachers, healers, caregivers, nurturers, where people were coming to them to seek help, whether physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. These people were also viewed in certain cultures as being like this bridge for cosmic insight, but also making sense of this physical life and existence. So when I randomly had this urge to look at gender and sexuality pre-colonialism, at this point, a lot of things just became, a lot of things just clicked. And for me, how I mentioned Two-Spirit, I'm Native American, I'm Black, and I'm also Native American, specifically on my dad's side, and it didn't click of how my dad's side, my great-grandmother who's still alive, still resides where the Cherokee Indians, you can look at the Native American map in the United States and it'll tell you which groups of like Native Americans were where. And the Cherokee specifically were in South Carolina, North Carolina, the Carolinas. My great grandmother still resides there to this day. And my dad will go back and visit. And I'm like, well, how come I never visited? But when I looked at this map and then I came across the term Two-Spirit, and then I found that it connects to Native American groups, and like the Cherokee group, they also have people who were Two-Spirit within it. And this is how it was viewed, and this is how they were treated, and this is how they look. I felt this intense feeling of just connecting with a part of myself that was lost. Connected with a part of myself that the world in today, in modern day, in today's society, does not make space for. So we do have to do the deep digging, because it's not known. The media doesn't want to represent it. And you have to do the research. So a lot of people too were asking me, like, have you, when I shared this on TikTok, have you, have you researched, or do you have any books? Do you have it? And I'm like, a lot of this comes from internally reflecting of why I even have the insight that I have. And then I may just fact check it with like, just going and doing a little research on just the thoughts that I'm having and seeing like, does it exist somewhere else? Have someone else had these thoughts? Like when I was having these thoughts about these people, or just trying to connect sex and sexuality and gender to spirituality somehow, some way, it just came about right when I needed it. So once again, when I came across, it wasn't like I specifically heard the term Two-Spirit. I was literally applying for a job on LinkedIn, and it asked me my gender, I believe. And it was like, boom, 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 Two-Spirit. And light bulb went off as soon as I heard Two-Spirit. I knew that spirit was talking to me in that moment. So then that led to me clicking Two-Spirit. I applied to the job, and then researching it, and then finding out that it connects the Cherokee Indians, and looking at like the Native American map to seeing where the Cherokee Indians were kind of originated from, and then realizing that that's still where my great grandmother lives till this day. On my dad's side of the family, who I remember being a kid, I had this obsession with wanting to know like what I was made of, essentially. And I'm like, I will always ask my mom, like, what are we? My mom was like, you're Black, but we're also boom, boom, boom. And then I remember going to like my dad, specifically my aunt on my dad's side, and being like, what's my dad? And she was just like, we're Black, Native American, and we have some white. I was like, okay. And that has always stuck with me since a child, and how it played a part in where I'm at in my journey today. It's just, words literally cannot words can't even define the internal feeling that I felt. And that's how overall I feel like queerness plays a part in spirituality. But also going back to when I said on TikTok, a lot of people weren't queer, because a lot of y'all claiming to be queer, and you hold up ideologies, beliefs that goes against queerness. How I was saying, words do have meaning and history behind them, and specifically queerness does. And you'll find that queerness was found in a lot of Black and Indigenous cultures. So here was how it was viewed, and here's how it was perceived. But also, there's a whole belief. It's not even just like who you choose to date or whatever the case may be and how you choose to look. It's a belief, it's a mindset of removing cis and hetero norms from that. Transphobia. And it's like also too, I feel like if you uphold certain isms and phobias in the sense of like, if you're racist, if you are misogynistic, sexist, and you have like genital preference plays a part in your attraction or the relationships, or if you are enforcing rigid gender and structured roles upon someone, you go against, you're walking contradiction when you claim queerness, because you're doing everything that queerness goes against. And that's the historical meaning behind it, because it's not just about the looks and how one's dressed and looking weird and funky or whatever the case may be. It has a whole mental belief behind it. And that's what I believe. And I have said that, like, if you claim to be queer, but you're doing, I 10 out of 10 won't view you as queer. Who am I to you? No one, but that's just my personal belief and how I look at it. So that was that one aspect of queerness that I was addressing on TikTok. But yeah, the whole journey kind of brought this full circle moment and connected me with my queerness, and then connected me with my transness, and then how I approach sex and how I viewed and approach sexuality. And now just on this journey too of just being extremely intentional with these aspects, but also like from a healed space, because little old me had so much guilt and shame, and I had to approach little old me and say, I love you, and you are safe now, and you are good, and you know, you can forgive those parts, you can release them, you don't have to hold on, you don't have to make space for them anymore. We can completely change this. So the way that you view these aspects of yourself, this doesn't have to be the story. The story doesn't have to continue in this light. We can completely shift it. And once I did that, I felt empowered. And a lot of what we see in society comes around sexuality or sex has a lot of shaming and guilt and negative beliefs surrounding it, right? And we don't want to talk about certain things, specifically for a lot of us, what we experienced as a child. But I feel like we have been taught in certain ways from being children that guilt and shame are almost like this home base for these aspects of ourselves pertaining to sex and sexuality, right? Now, when I was approaching it, because once again, spirituality being diving within, I had to approach this part of myself. I now transmuted it where I felt empowered. It was like when I was engaged and I was being curious and I was being experiential with these parts of myself, I was getting to know myself, and it was allowing me to get closer to myself. And now that I'm closer to myself, I know myself, and now I can move more authentically with how I feel within my core. And I just felt so empowered. I felt so strong. I felt so light. All these heavy emotions and feelings that I've had since a child, from whether it was negative sexual encounters or people's opposed and adverse negative reaction to these thoughts that I had that were taboo. I was now exploring them from such a free space where it made no space for shame and guilt or any negativity. It was like, this is bridging the gap from what I don't know to what I'm trying to know and connecting it all. And a lot of people during that state won't understand. A lot of people will judge. And at that point, by the time of my journey, I realized I couldn't live a life, and no one should be living a life where your decisions, your behaviors, your mindset, what you choose to do is completely dictated based on the reactions of others, because there's always going to be someone talking, whether it's a stranger, whether it's a friend, whether it's family, people are going to talk. Was I going to allow that to stop me from who I am? Was I going to allow that to stop me from getting to know who I am? Was I going to allow that to stop me from getting acquainted, getting familiar, getting connected with this voice that is screaming from within? And it's only screaming from within because the world has shut them out and told these parts of myself, this isn't socially acceptable. It's not morally good or correct. This is not ethical. And this isn't what we should be talking or how we should be thinking or what we should be doing. And I had to sit with that point. Whose voice is that? Is it mine? Or is it that negative person, whether it's mom, dad, society, whatever the case, or is it that negative Nancy? It has no space to be existing within this. Within such beauty, such light, such within this body. I never made space for you to exist. So why are you here? And I had to sit with that. So by the point where I started being curious and exploring, I had already got through that muck of shutting that voice out and telling it you can go somewhere else where you might succeed, because you're not succeeding here. I done already cracked codes and shifted my paradigm. I'm thinking different. I'm believing differently. Where now it's from a space of now I have all this insight, I have all these wisdoms, and I'm believing and I'm thinking differently and I'm feeling differently. Do I act on it? Because some people feel these things and they just sit with it because it's scary what comes. You don't know what happens once you start acting on that internal feeling after going through the internal muck of shifting through your trauma and shifting through like beliefs and mindsets and experiences that have literally impacted you and affected you in a way. And it's not turning a blind eye towards it, it's looking it straight in the face with your shadow and facing it head on and transmuting it. So now it adds a whole completely different like hue of colors to your life. But now it's like, are you gonna act on them? Are you gonna move on these colors? They all have different feelings and they're all bringing you in different directions. Now with this transmuted and healed, from this transmuted and healed space, leading you closer to yourself, now will you go on that journey to get closer to yourself? Because you can think, and it can sound so good, but it can be so frightening and scary to actually act. It can be so frightening and scary to actually start doing, and it can be so frightening and scary to actually start being who has always been within, but the world just shut it out. And to think that I would just sit and allow my life to go by, because this is where we have people talk about time passing and I'm so old. And all of it is an illusion. All of it is constructs that don't actually exist. It's just the fact that we affirm them makes it exist. And we think, oh, I'm too old, or time's just passing me by. And I was like, oh no. I need stories to tell my kids, or I want stories to tell strangers along my journey. I want stories to tell my friends that I'll make along the way and that I have now. So that's how, for me, I feel like spirituality connected and intersects with sexuality, with queerness, with transness. It's all of those things for me. And it has opened a door to get to know who I am in this moment, but it's also this continuation and getting to know who I am, getting to know and acquainted with my becoming, and getting to know and getting connected with what is and what has always been here, but now I'm making space for it to be expressed. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. Mwah.